right. Now it's time for Alex. And we have spent a lot of time these days already speaking about how IT is the ivory tower in which agility sits in solitude. Agility has been proven extremely successful as a concept, even though it has been abused in certain scaling endeavors. And sometimes it's been confused as this universal tool to fix any transformational problem. Simplicity and modularity are central qualities within agility. And they're really, really important coping mechanisms in a flexible and dynamic world. Alex is a business architect in Avro Labs Incorporated, joining us from Toronto. And he will take us through a couple case studies of transformation projects from the public sector. So please give him a very warm welcome.
Hello. So I'm Alex Romanov. I'm from Canada, as it was already said. I'm a business architect and I'm a consultant, and mostly I work for very big enterprises such as government ministries, and meeting a lot of complexities there and trying to deal with them, especially in the new world when everybody wants to be agile. So the business architecture in this environment has a lot of challenges, and this business environment basically creates a lot of conflicting requirements to the business architecture. So for years, this discipline was trying to provide a multi-level, multi-connected, multi-view method to describe an enterprise with the sole purpose to actually enable business transformation. So we created very complex meta models describing how different parts of enterprise are to be described in their relationships. These meta models were becoming more and more complex. The one on the right is the one of the Ontario government. We basically moved from describing processes in relation to organizational units to service models where services feed each other with their outputs and they basically cross the organizational units, thus removing the redundancies and improving the collaborations. We created huge service models. Like, these are just two examples. The one on the right is of the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, and this is just one service, which is the environmental compliance of the Ministry of Environment of Ontario. So very complex models. We created tons of business processes, stored them in different tools, and created huge repositories of information about how these businesses work. And all that is organized in something described in Zachman framework and artifacts and so on, and they are all interrelated. They sit in repositories. And it looks like we did a lot of work and we know how these ministries work. So, but what do we hear? We hear that it's all very slow, it's all very complex, it takes too much time to build, it's almost impossible to change, it provides very little value and too late for the IT development, and people basically try to find ways to not do it and somehow walk around and, you know, maybe skip, maybe ask the senior managers that skip it for just this project. And then what happens to happen is everybody wants everything very quick and outsourced and quicker and even more outsourced. So we hear all this, and basically we see that on the one hand, we have very complex, very detailed business architecture models. On another hand, we need this methodology and this discipline to provide some rapid and very on-demand service to those who want to outsource, those who want to change business right now, not in half a year when we develop the next set of models. Another issue is what I call the system black box mentality. You see, these enterprises, they started a long time ago, and long time ago there were very good enterprises, some of them generating revenues, very well established, and there were the SMEs in these enterprises who knew very well how it all works. They knew business rules, they knew why these enterprises are the way they are. They created business models. And then some 50 years ago or more, the automation started. You know, the IBMs of the world came, started creating mainframes, basically added additional systems with time. The rules were converted into code. The SME knowledge was put into this framework. So the next generations of these SMEs started to grow and make their careers in the environment which is infested with these systems, with the system logic, which basically the business logic embedded into system logic. So the system behavior was documented and was called policies and operational manuals. However, that was the screen flows documentation, basically. The third-party partners worked in the same environment. And then what happened? With time, the initial logic blurred in memories. The generations of these people changed. And the business were described mostly in IT terms. The business rules embedded in code. The IT experience became the business experience. And basically what happened, the silos started to think that, well, they are very unique because they use the unique systems. And that's this way because it always was so. And now we're in the environment when the system logic totally defines how the business works. So we have stakeholders which perceives their enterprise as basically the IT managed black box. They have no idea what was the initial logic in the business. Which reminds me of this picture by Kazimir Malevich, the black square. So the generations of business leaders tried to think about modernization. They tried to outsource, disrupt digital models, blah, blah, blah. But they default to one thing only. They actually perceive opportunities as system updates, and they invest in IT updates while keeping the same business models intact. The consequences of these are multiple, and you can read them maybe later, but what happens is there are system-inspired business silos. You know, Montecchi used this system, Capuletti used those systems, and they hate each other. And if you try to innovate, no, you innovate our system, you don't innovate their system, even though those systems have redundant business functions embedded in them, but still these relationships, they prevent from doing this. So basically, it's almost impossible to redesign business outside of the IT. And there is little of business strategy outside of the IT. All the solutions default to replatforming from the old platform to the new platform with the same business logic. And many other interesting things. Oh, what did I do? Sorry. Many other interesting things happen. And basically, IT drives the agenda. And when you talk about agility in this environment, that means that agility means agility of IT development, of system development. So on the one side, we have the classic business architecture, which has to be system agnostic, which has to talk about business. On the other hand, we have this black box mentality, which deals strictly with systems and logic, which is in the systems. So the mantra of business architecture always was, we need to be system agnostic. That's true, but we live in this environment. This is the real environment with which we have to deal. So in the real world, when you're dealing with business architecture, you actually are forced to deal with those systems to at least extract the logic from them, in order to redesign how the business works. The third question is, we're talking about agility all the time, but the agility of what? These three guys, Zachman, Ross, and Roger Burton, came with the interesting document lately, which is called the Business Agility Manifesto, which says many interesting things, but it says that the business agility is ability to modify the business itself and to rapidly change it. It says that business change depends on the business knowledge base. It says that development of software faster is not sufficient for business software and growth. So all the scrums in the world, are they important? Who knows, because they might not contribute to this. The measure of agile business is the ability to change rapidly the business knowledge base and the amount of business knowledge which is in the knowledge base. The scrap and rework, if you have it in your agile process because you don't have a proper business knowledge, that's scrap, that's waste. The creation of value for silos, again, if you create it in your agile processes, but it has no value for the enterprise. And the business knowledge base is basically a mandatory thing for the modern business if you want to be agile. So this manifesto, it's not my work, of course, it's the work of these three guys. Here is their link. I encourage everybody to go there and read the whole document. This is basically the essence of them. And by the way, Sasha here participated in creation of this thing. So what I'm going to talk about is the tactic. This is strategy, but how to build your business architecture in order to provide these outputs. So in the black box mentality organization, it confuses the rapid business change with the rapid IT delivery. So in the 90s, maybe even earlier, there was such a saying that you cannot get fired for hiring IBM. So that's old. Now you cannot get fired for bringing an agile project. So very often these agile projects look like cargo cults. You know what is a cargo cult, right? So you build a straw plane and you wait for something to come from the skies. So yes, the IT agile projects always, not always, but frequently adhere to formalities. They do scrums, they do project roles, events, stand-ups, user stories, and so on. And what do they kill? They kill the things which need time. They throw away business architecture, which is usually the first victim to go out of the window. So it's nice to criticize. It's nice to joke about this. But the issue is that the real enterprise, in order to be agile, actually needs fast delivery of their IT projects also. So there is the contradiction here that on one hand, you need to enable your business agility, but on the other hand, you cannot avoid doing the agile business delivery. So what I'm saying is that the business architecture now in the 21st century has to be done in a different way than before. It actually has to be to focus on business agility, it has to provide and enable the IT delivery, and it has to be agile itself. Otherwise, it will not work in the modern world. So governance, around architecture, they always created very rigid governance models. These are the documents which have a funny name, Go ITS 56, which is the Government of Ontario governance regulation, which you have to follow. It basically describes what you have to do on which stage in the project. I'm not going into details, but it enforces the governance. But the fact is that complex large enterprises, such as ministries, they will sink in chaos if you don't do that. However, if you want to do that, you have no time to do that. So one more contradiction is that you have to have some rigid enterprise architecture governance, but in the same time, let's throw out all the bureaucracy, and that is a bureaucracy. So the big question which we face now is this: how to be well architected and well governed, for that matter, and still agile. So the agility is a modern necessity. Everybody recognizes that. And if the business architecture cannot support it, well, that's this or else statement. It will be obsolete, and it is very often obsolete, and all these models are becoming obsolete before they're finished. So you have to learn to do new things. You have to work covertly, not in the projects. You have to collect information and be ready to present it on demand, the information which is sufficient for a rapid change of the business. You have to help to generate the business cases which facilitate both business and IT agility together. It's not a contradiction. You have to dramatically improve and speed up the IT project scoping based on this. You have to reveal in advance those components of the business which can be outsourced theoretically, and be ready on demand to provide this information with interfaces and with outsourcing processes when the business decides that they need to do it. So if you can do it very fast, then you actually support the agility. So there is no anymore ivory tower. If you are in ivory tower, you're dead. And basically, you need to become the agile, on-demand change agent. So what I want to speak now is just experience from several very huge projects which I worked on, and we tried to implement these ideas in the projects, but trust me, there is no silver bullet. All of these are not silver bullets. They are pieces of approaches which help, but you still have to do it, and that's big work. So the first point is componentization. So componentization is the key concept of anything agile. You need to break your work into small pieces. You have to prioritize them. You have to work on them one by one. And then you have to do one of them, look at them again, reprioritize. Here is one very significant architect working on certain structures, building very different structures, as you can see, from blocks. And because this is business architecture, there are some processes here. Where's my process? Doesn't work, sorry. And basically, architecting something from these examples is knowing which blocks to use and how to combine and how to modify them and do it fast. So the idea of using the construction blocks for architecture is absolutely not new. Every framework had it. There are lots of ideas of what should be the construction blocks. The question is, what are the optimal construction blocks to make all types of agility happen? So if you look at this picture, is this a component of this construction? Or is this a component of this construction? This seems to be a pattern, which is repeatable. This is just one block. What we need to do is we need to redefine our business in terms of modules which are highly reusable, which are easily customizable, which are independently redesignable, and also they have to be not too small, because if they are too small, you have too many of them. It's very hard to manage them. And they don't have to be very big, because if they are big, that means that they are complex inside, and that means that it's very difficult to change them. So they have to be optimized somehow. The experience shows that pattern-based modules are optimal. So this is our module to manage going forward. Let's say this is your enterprise, and it has several lines of business, and each line of business has some architectural components. These are not processes. These are whatever components we decide to be components. And as you can see, these components, they shape up your lines of business in your enterprise. So these are reusable patterns, which they can be functions, they can be processes, they can be parts of processes. The important thing is that they have their boundaries well defined. The important thing is that their interactions between these components are well defined. The important thing is that the internal structures of these components are well defined. And then you can take such component and modify it by applying certain modifiers to these components. These modifiers can be business rules, for example. So if you change the set of business rules from this component, it becomes this component, and it can be used in a different line of business. The interesting thing here is that you can take some of these components and create another interface for them, consolidate them, and you have a new internal service which serves all lines of business and creates some kind of efficiency. You can take these components and take them outside of the organization and create a new interface, describe it, and you have the outsourced functionality. So you can take these components and use them as the foundation for your IT development project's backlog. And you can prioritize them here, and you also can use them to define your business requirements for your IT projects. And basically the idea here is this: the more unique, in quotes, are your lines of business, the less chance to have any agility there you have. The more they are designed based on the reusable components, the more agility you can do. Because here, this example, you need to create this, consolidate this internal service urgently because it creates the efficiency now. You have to do it now. So if you have these business components predefined with interfaces, internal structures, modifiers, and all that, you can do it very quickly. But if you have end-to-end processes, which are very complex, you know, with a lot of logic in them and with a lot of if, then, here, there, if you try to do this trick, you have to spend half a year to actually cut those end-to-end processes and still define these interfaces and everything for outsourcing, but you will spend a lot of time to do that, and that's not agility already. So we're talking about business architectural patterns as components for agility. So everybody in this audience knows this book, I believe. That's Christopher Alexander, who introduced the idea of the patterns. So I'm not talking about what the pattern is. There is a hell of a lot of books about patterns, more books, more books. Unfortunately, there is very little thinking in these books about business architecture patterns. They're for IT, they're for whatever, but not for business architecture. And what we constantly see is business architects on different projects and different organizations are rebuilding, remodeling the same models over and over again from scratch, which takes a lot of time and which kills the agility. So what patterns to use for enterprise agility? The first attempt, more than 10 years ago, maybe more, was the classic GSRM. GSRM is the government services reference model which was created for the government of Canada a long time ago. And it was adopted by many municipalities in different jurisdictions, used in many different places. These are the covers of the official publications about this. So the main thing which GSRM introduced was the idea of patterns for services and patterns for processes. So all services which, and when I'm talking about services, please don't perceive it as a SOA or some IT services. It's purely business. So the business services follow certain patterns, and then the processes which are embedded in these services, which enable these services, they also follow certain patterns. So you don't need to reinvent every process from scratch. You don't need to reinvent every service from scratch. You just look at the catalog of these patterns, you pick one, modify it to your needs, and you're done. Nice. So this, I'm not going to read this. If you want, you can read it later. But these are 19 service patterns which describe any government in the world. So believe it or not, these services are provided by Ontario government, by Czech government, by North Korean government, doesn't matter. The business rules matter. The way how they provide it matter. But these services are typical government services. And it's very difficult to invent one more service for the citizens outside of this list. Maybe you can, I don't know. So the idea is that there are these 19 patterns, and you can describe any government in the world by them. Below each of these patterns, there are 4 cycles of process patterns. So they're called delivery processes, planning, provisioning, and decommissioning processes. So this is the list of the patterns for delivery processes. And usually what happens is that when the BPM or process design exercises happen, usually people tackle these processes. So this is something which is obvious because these processes, they deliver some value to the outside clients, and these are client-facing processes, so you know that they happen. And again, you can use these patterns to design them. The planning processes, which are listed here, and again, you can read these lists later, very important. That's the background work in any enterprise. But usually during such, business process design things, they're forgotten most of the time. Nobody thinks about them. And I heard you, Milan, speaking about considering the employees as clients as well, basically speaking to them and addressing actually these things. So that's a good approach. But what I see, over and over again, people look at the external delivery to clients. They forget about anything happening in the background. Same thing about provisioning, also frequently omitted. And the same thing about decommissioning. So you have to look at not only at process models, but also on functional models. When you structure your architecture around functions, you notice that designing the process reuses the same functions, but if you redesign a function, that affects multiple processes. So the function-based architectures actually happen to be much more agile than process-oriented. Another spin-off is you can generate very good questionnaires from these models for business requirements, and these business requirements take days to elicit instead of weeks to deliver. So the idea of the GSRM was very good and worked for a long time. People created huge models, and it worked for some time. But at some point, we understood that these end-to-end processes, which are the basis of GSRM, they are very difficult to manage. So I'm not going into details here, but the idea is that changing the GSRM model to do some business change is very difficult. It takes a lot of time. So not really agile, though it's much better than no patterns at all. We started to look at different patterns which enable such agile architecture. And here is the example of the case management pattern. Like many processes follow the case management pattern, managing different things. Like this example is from the Minister of Environment, and they're doing inspections, they're doing incident management, they're investigating and enforcing some incompliance, and they're doing the incompliance reduction plans cases. So if you look at these business process models, they seem to be very complex. They are almost GSRM type. It's very difficult to change them because they are very different and they don't blend together. However, all of them follow the same case management pattern. And you need to understand your case, you need to assign somebody, the case manager to the case, you need to plan the case, you need to execute the case, you need to communicate the case, you need to understand what additional activities you need, and then you need to close the case. So what happens here is, here are these business lines of business. You can take these very complicated processes and remodel them into this structure. So color coding here actually reflects this fact. So whatever is blue here fits into one blue box here. That's the sub-process under it. Whatever is yellow here fits under one box here. So what we have here is a very interesting construction block. So this is the construction block. These 5 things form just one construction block. It's all in the same. In this case, it's assign assign case manager to the case. And the difference between these things inside of these boxes are some sub-processes and some business rules. But on the high level, they're exactly the same. So if you manage a library of such high-level modules, you actually have a very agile brick from which you can construct any of these just by changing business rules inside. And that's a very quick process. It's a quick process which allows you to do a very fast change. Very quickly about this, 2 minutes. In the majority of business processes that we manage, that we work with, we have something which I call shared functions. You need to manage documents. These processes, they create some outputs, some documents. These documents have to go into some repository. That's the document management process. You need to manage records. You need to manage notifications and communications. You need to manage user profiles, etc. So guess what? These things usually are embedded into the main business process. And it is very difficult to extract them from there in order to change. So if you separate them from the get-go, if you keep them separate, you actually can use patterns for them literally from the internet, because these things are so well known, are so well established that 1-minute search on Google actually gives you a bunch of patterns for the process which are reusable and which will most probably satisfy your clients. And then you just use them and modify them by business rules. I have many more parts here. I'll skip them very quickly just to give you the understanding of what's inside here, then you can read it. Because this work, I think, deserves, I don't know, the one-day workshop or something to teach. So, rapid modifications. You can always create your processes in the form of very simplistic skeletons of processes with modifiers, which are data components and which are business rules which you apply to them. So this is a very short and very simplistic process which describes any permission management in any government. Your driver license, your whatever permission you ask from the government, this is what you do. And the difference between different lines of business is business rules if you manage them properly. managing properly business rules, creating the hierarchies of them in order to create proper modifiers is the art in itself, which is a very important enabler for agility. If you keep all rules in a separate repository, you enable two things: very quick modification of the business, and also you enable rules engines on the IT side, which means that the IT projects are also done much quicker than recoding something, because you need just to change business rules in the rules engine. Segregated business design, this is the approach which allows you to think ahead and understand which parts of your business can be theoretically outsourced. You design your business in such a form, you start from the business model, basically understanding what can be outsourceable and what is the core, which will never be outsourced. And you pre-design the boundaries inside of your organization and pre-define your interfaces inside of the organization in such a way that when it is needed, when the need comes, you can quickly take it and outsource it, and you are ready for that. Business knowledge base, the very important thing. All knowledge bases that we created so far, they contain end-to-end processes, tons of them, which are very difficult to manage and absolutely not agile whatsoever. If you need to do something with your, in your house, you need to do something with the sewage pipe in your house. What do? You go to the municipal repository of drawings, and then they find a drawing of your house and they show you where that pipe is, and then the workers can come in and do the digging exactly in the proper place and do a very agile work of repairing your sewage. If you don't do this, if you don't have this repository, you can go all around your lot and you can dig here, no pipe, dig there, no pipe, dig there, no pipe. It's a very agile process, but you will not get the result. Some repositories are like this. They have to be managed much better. So there are some ideas about how to manage these repositories. And the most important part is what has to be the content of the repository, not end-to-end processes. They have to be the pre-defined architectural modules which you can actually manage and reuse in different places by changing them. So their agility is the managed repository of modifiable spare modules, not the ready products. And that's all about your governance. You govern such repository of modules, of construction blocks, of spare parts, as opposed to end-to-end products. Okay, so this is the basic. There is a lot more information here about background processes, governance, and how to make the processes work together for business and IT agility, and how to educate business on all this. And sometimes you need to use some heavy artillery. This is Roger Burton, whom I invited to speak in the ministry in order basically to bring the authority to explain them that the business agility is better than just doing software fast. That's it. Thank you.